Two evil kings of Judah, Manasseh and Ammon. Chapter 21. King Manasseh of Judah. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 33, 1-20. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled 55 years from Jerusalem. His mother was Hephzibah. Manasseh disobeyed the Lord by following the disgusting customs of the nations that the Lord had forced out of Israel. He rebuilt the local shrines that his father Hezekiah had torn down. He built altars for the god Baal and set up a sacred pole for worshipping the goddess Asherah, just as King Ahab of Israel had done, and he faithfully worshipped the stars in heaven. In the temple where only the Lord was supposed to be worshipped, Manasseh built altars for pagan gods and for the stars. He placed these altars in both courts of the temple and even set up the pole for Asherah there. Manasseh practiced magic and witchcraft. He asked fortune tellers for advice and sacrificed his own son. He did many sinful things and made the Lord very angry. Years ago, the Lord had told David and his son Solomon, "Jerusalem is the place I prefer above all others in Israel. It belongs to me, and there I will be worshipped forever. If my people will faithfully obey all the commands in the law of my servant Moses, I will never make them leave the land I gave to their ancestors." But the people of Judah disobeyed the Lord. They listened to Manasseh and did even more sinful things than the nations the Lord had wiped out. One day the Lord said to some of his prophets, "King Manasseh has done more disgusting things than the Amorites, and he has led my people to sin by forcing them to worship his idols. Now I, the Lord God of Israel, will destroy both Jerusalem and Judah. People will hear about it but won't believe it. Jerusalem is as sinful as Ahab and the people of Samaria were. So I will wipe out Jerusalem and be done with it, just as someone wipes water off a plate and turns it over to dry. I will even get rid of my people who survive. They will be defeated and robbed by their enemies. My people have done what I hate and have not stopped making me angry since their ancestors left Egypt." Manasseh was guilty of causing the people of Judah to sin and disobey the Lord. He also refused to protect innocent people. He even let so many of them be killed that their blood filled the streets of Jerusalem. Everything else Manasseh did while he was king, including his terrible sins, is written in the history of the kings of Judah. He died and was buried in Uzzah garden near his palace, and his son Ammon became king. King Ammon of Judah. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 33, 21-25. Ammon was 22 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled from Jerusalem for 2 years. His mother, Meshullemeth, was the daughter of Haruz from Zotbah. Ammon disobeyed the Lord just as his father Manasseh had done. Ammon worshipped the idols Manasseh had made and refused to be faithful to the Lord, the God his ancestors had worshipped. Some of Ammon's officials plotted against him and killed him in his palace. He was buried in Uzzah garden. Soon after that, the people of Judah killed the murderers of Ammon. Then they made his son Josiah king. Everything else Ammon did while he was king is written in the history of the kings of Judah. The rule of King Josiah and the book of God's law. Chapter 22. King Josiah of Judah. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 34, 1-2. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled 31 years from Jerusalem. His mother Jedidah was the daughter of Adiah from Bozkath. Josiah always obeyed the Lord, just as his ancestor David had done. Hilkiah finds the book of God's law. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 34, 8-28. After Josiah had been king for 18 years, he told Shaphan, one of his highest officials, "Go to the Lord's temple and ask Hilkiah the high priest to collect from the guards all the money that the people have donated." Tell Hilkiah to give it to the men supervising the repairs to the temple. They can use some of the money to pay the workers, and with the rest of it, they can buy wood and stone for the repair work. They are honest, so we won't ask them to keep track of the money. While Shaphan was at the temple, Hilkiah handed him a book and said, "Look what I found here in the temple, the book of God's law." Shaphan read it, then went back to Josiah and reported, "Your officials collected the money in the temple and gave it to the men supervising the repairs. But there's something else, Your Majesty. The priest Hilkiah gave me this book." Then Shaphan read it out loud. When Josiah heard what was in the book of God's law, he tore his clothes in sorrow. At once he called together Hilkiah, Shaphan, Ahikam, son of Shaphan, Akbor, son of Milkiah, and his own servant Asaiah. He said, "The Lord must be furious with me and everyone else in Judah, because our ancestors did not obey the laws written in this book. Go and find out what the Lord wants us to do." The 5 men left straight away and went to talk with Huldah the prophet. Her husband was Shallum, who was in charge of the king's clothes. Huldah lived in the northern part of Jerusalem, and when they met in her home, she said, "You were sent here by King Josiah, and this is what the Lord God of Israel says to him, 'Josiah, I am the Lord, and I will see to it that this country and everyone living in it will be destroyed. It will happen just as this book says. The people of Judah have rejected me. They have offered sacrifices to foreign gods and have worshipped their own idols. I cannot stand it any longer. I am furious. Josiah, listen to what I am going to do. I noticed how sad you were when you read that this country and its people would be completely wiped out. You even tore your clothes in sorrow, and I heard you cry. So I will let you die in peace before I destroy this place." The men left and took Huldah's answer back to Josiah. Chapter 23. Josiah reads the book of God's law. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 34:29-33. King Josiah called together the older leaders of Judah and Jerusalem. Then he went to the Lord's temple, together with the people of Judah and Jerusalem, the priests and the prophets. Finally, when everybody was there, he read aloud the book of God's law that had been found in the temple. After Josiah had finished reading, he stood by one of the columns. He asked the people to promise in the Lord's name to obey the Lord faithfully and to follow his commands. The people agreed to do everything written in the book. Josiah follows the teachings of God's law. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 34:3-7. Josiah told Hilkiah the priest, the assistant priests, and the guards at the temple door to go into the temple and bring out the things used to worship Baal, Asherah, and the stars. Josiah had these things burnt in Kidron Valley just outside Jerusalem, and he had the ashes carried away to the town of Bethel. Josiah also got rid of the pagan priests at the local shrines in Judah and around Jerusalem. These were the men whom the kings of Judah had appointed to offer sacrifices to Baal and to the sun, moon, and stars. Josiah had the sacred pole for Asherah brought out of the temple and taken to Kidron Valley, where it was burnt. He then had its ashes ground into dust and scattered over the public cemetery there. He had the buildings torn down where the male prostitutes lived next to the temple and where the women wove sacred robes for the idol of Asherah. In almost every town in Judah, priests had been offering sacrifices to the Lord at local shrines. Josiah brought these priests to Jerusalem and had their shrines made unfit for worship. Every shrine from Geba just north of Jerusalem to Beersheba in the south. He even tore down the shrine at Beersheba that was just to the left of Joshua Gate, which was named after the highest official of the city. Those local priests could not serve at the Lord's altar in Jerusalem, but they were allowed to eat sacred bread, just like the priests from Jerusalem. Josiah sent some men to Hinnom Valley, just outside Jerusalem, with orders to make the altar there unfit for worship. That way, people could no longer use it for sacrificing their children to the god Molech. He also got rid of the horses that the kings of Judah used in their ceremonies to worship the sun, and he destroyed the chariots along with them. The horses had been kept near the entrance to the Lord's temple in a courtyard close to where an official named Nathan Melech lived. Some of the kings of Judah, especially Manasseh, had built altars in the two courts of the temple and in the room that Ahaz had built on the palace roof. Josiah had these altars torn down and smashed to pieces, and he had the pieces thrown into Kidron Valley, just outside Jerusalem. After that, he closed down the shrines that Solomon had built east of Jerusalem and south of Spoil Hill to honor Astarte, the disgusting goddess of Sidon, Chemosh, the disgusting god of Moab, and Milcom, the disgusting god of Ammon. He tore down the stone images of foreign gods and cut down the sacred pole used in the worship of Asherah. Then he had the whole area covered with human bones. But Josiah had not finished yet. At Bethel, he destroyed the shrine and the altar that Jeroboam son of Nebat had built and that had caused the Israelites to sin. Josiah had the shrine and the Asherah pole burnt and ground into dust. As he looked around, he saw graves on the hillside. He had the bones in them dug up and burnt on the altar, so that it could no longer be used. This happened but just as God's prophet had said when Jeroboam was standing at the altar, celebrating a festival. Then Josiah saw the grave of the prophet who had said this would happen, and he asked, "Whose grave is that?" Some people who lived nearby answered, "It belongs to the prophet from Judah who told what would happen to this altar." Josiah replied, "Then leave it alone. Don't dig up his bones." So they did not disturb his bones or the bones of the old prophet from Israel who had also been buried there. Some of the Israelite kings had made the Lord angry by building pagan shrines all over Israel. So Josiah sent troops to destroy these shrines just as he had done to the one in Bethel. He killed the priests who served at them and burnt their bones on the altars. After all that, Josiah went back to Jerusalem. Josiah and the people of Judah celebrate Passover. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 35, 1-19. Josiah told the people of Judah, "Celebrate Passover in honor of the Lord your God, just as it says in the book of God's law." This festival had not been celebrated in this way since kings ruled Israel and Judah. But in Josiah's 18th year as king of Judah, everyone came to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. The Lord is still angry with the people of Judah. Josiah got rid of every disgusting person and thing in Judah and Jerusalem, including magicians, fortune tellers, and idols. He did his best to obey every law written in the book that the priest Hilkiah found in the Lord's temple. No other king before or after Josiah tried as hard as he did to obey the law of Moses. But the Lord was still furious with the people of Judah because Manasseh had done so many things to make him angry. The Lord said, "I will desert the people of Judah just as I deserted the people of Israel. I will reject Jerusalem even though I chose it to be mine, and I will abandon this temple built to honor me." Josiah dies in battle. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 35:20-36:1. Everything else Josiah did while he was king is written in the history of the kings of Judah. During Josiah's rule, King Necho of Egypt led his army north to the river Euphrates to help the king of Assyria. Josiah led his troops north to fight Necho, but when they met in battle at Megiddo, Josiah was killed. A few of Josiah's servants put his body in a chariot and took it back to Jerusalem, where they buried it in his own tomb. Then the people of Judah found his son Jehoahaz and poured olive oil on his head to show that he was their new king. The last kings of Judah, King Jehoahaz of Judah. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 36, 2-4. Jehoahaz was 3 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled from Jerusalem only 3 months. His mother Hamutal was the daughter of Jeremiah from Limna. Jehoahaz disobeyed the law just as some of his ancestors had done. King Necho of Egypt had Jehoahaz arrested and put in prison at Riblah near Hamath. Then he forced the people of Judah to pay him 3,400 kilograms of silver and 34 kilograms of gold as taxes. Necho appointed Josiah's son Eliakim king of Judah and changed his name to Jehoiakim. He took Jehoahaz as a prisoner to Egypt, where he died. Jehoiakim forced the people of Judah to pay higher taxes so he could give Necho the silver and gold he demanded. King Jehoiakim of Judah. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 36, 5-8. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he was appointed king, and he ruled 11 years from Jerusalem. His mother, Zebidah, was the daughter of Pedaiah from Rumah. Jehoiakim disobeyed the Lord by following the example of his ancestors. Chapter 24. During Jehoiakim's rule, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia invaded and took control of Judah. Jehoiakim obeyed Nebuchadnezzar for 3 years. Then he rebelled. At that time, the Lord started sending troops to rob and destroy towns in Judah. Some of these troops were from Babylonia, and others were from Syria, Moab, and Ammon. The Lord had sent his servants, the prophets, to warn Judah about this, and now he was making it happen. The country of Judah was going to be wiped out because Manasseh had sinned and caused many innocent people to die. The Lord would not forgive this. Everything else Jehoiakim did while he was king is written in the history of the kings of Judah. Jehoiakim died, and his son Jehoiachin became king. King Nebuchadnezzar defeated King Necho of Egypt and took control of his land from the Egyptian gorge all the way north to the river Euphrates. So Necho never invaded Judah again. King Jehoiachin of Judah is taken to Babylon. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 36, 9-10. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king of Judah, and he ruled only 3 months from Jerusalem. His mother Nehushata was the daughter of Elnathan from Jerusalem. Jehoiachin disobeyed the Lord, just as his father Jehoiakim had done. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia sent troops to attack Jerusalem soon after Jehoiachin became king. During the attack, Nebuchadnezzar himself arrived at the city. Jehoiachin immediately surrendered, told with his mother and his servants, as well as his army officers and officials. Then Nebuchadnezzar had Jehoiachin arrested. These things took place in the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar's rule in Babylonia. The Lord had warned that someday the treasures would be taken from the royal palace and from the temple, including the gold objects that Solomon had made for the temple. And that's exactly what Nebuchadnezzar ordered his soldiers to do. He also led away as prisoners the Jerusalem officials, the military leaders, and the skilled workers, 10,000 in all. Only the very poorest people were left in Judah. Nebuchadnezzar took Jehoiachin to Babylon along with his mother, his wives, his officials, and the most important leaders of Judah. He also led away 7,000 soldiers, 1,000 skilled workers, and anyone who would be useful in battle. Then Nebuchadnezzar appointed Jehoiachin's uncle Mattaniah, king of Judah, and changed his name to Zedekiah. King Zedekiah of Judah. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 36, 11-16. Jeremiah 52, 1-3. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he was appointed king of Judah, and he ruled from Jerusalem for 11 years. His mother Hamutal was the daughter of Jeremiah from Libnah. Zedekiah disobeyed the Lord just as Jehoiakim had done. It was Zedekiah who finally rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar. The people of Judah and Jerusalem had made the Lord so angry that he finally turned his back on them. That's why these horrible things were happening. Jerusalem is destroyed and the people are taken to Babylonia. Chapter 25. Jerusalem is captured and destroyed. This is also told in 2 Chronicles 36:17-21, Jeremiah 52:3-30. In Zedekiah's 9th year as king, on the 10th day of the 10th month, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia led his entire army to attack Jerusalem. The troops set up camp outside the city and built ramps up to the city walls. After a year and a half, all the food in Jerusalem was gone. Then on the 9th day of the 4th month, the Babylonian troops broke through the city wall. That same night, Zedekiah and his soldiers tried to escape through the gate near the royal garden, even though they knew the enemy had the city surrounded. They headed towards the desert. But the Babylonian troops caught up with them near Jericho. They arrested Zedekiah, but his soldiers scattered in every direction. Zedekiah was taken to Riblah, where Nebuchadnezzar put him on trial and found him guilty. Zedekiah's sons were killed right in front of him. His eyes were then put out, and he was put in chains and dragged off to Babylon. About a month later, in Nebuchadnezzar's 19th year as king, Nebuzaradan, who was his official in charge of the guards, arrived in Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan burnt down the Lord's temple, the king's palace, and every important building in the city, as well as all the houses. Then he ordered the Babylonian soldiers to break down the walls around Jerusalem. He led away as prisoners the people left in the city, including those who had become loyal to Nebuchadnezzar. Only some of the poorest people were left behind to work the vineyards and the fields. The Babylonian soldiers took the 2 bronze columns that stood in front of the temple, the 10 movable bronze stands, and the large bronze bowl called the sea. They broke them into pieces so they could take the bronze to Babylonia. They carried off the bronze things used to worship at the temple, including the pans for hot ashes and the shovels, snuffers, and also the dishes for incense, as well as the fire pans and the sprinkling bowls. Nebuzaradan ordered his soldiers to take everything made of gold or silver. The pile of bronze from the columns, the stands, and the large bowl that Solomon had made for the temple was too large to be weighed. Each column had been 8 meters tall with a bronze cap over 1 meter high. These caps were decorated with bronze designs, some of them like chains and others like pomegranates. Next, Nebuzaradan arrested Seraiah, the chief priest, Zephaniah, his assistant, and 3 temple officials. Then he arrested one of the army commanders, the king's 5 personal advisors, and the officer in charge of gathering the troops for battle. He also found 60 more soldiers who were still in Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan led them all to Riblah near Hamath, where Nebuchadnezzar had them killed. The people of Judah no longer lived in their own country. Gedaliah is made ruler and King Jehoiachin is released from prison. Gedaliah is made ruler of the people left in Judah. King Nebuchadnezzar appointed Gedaliah, son of Ahikam, to rule the few people still living in Judah. When the army officers and troops heard that Gedaliah was their ruler, the officers met with him at Mizpah. These men were Ishmael, son of Nethaniah, Johanan, son of Kareah, Seraiah, son of Tanhumeth from Netophah, and Jajaniah from Maacah. Gedaliah said to them, "Everything will be fine, I promise. We don't need to be afraid of the Babylonian rulers if we live here peacefully and do what Nebuchadnezzar says." Ishmael was from the royal family, and about 2 months after Gedaliah began his rule, Ishmael and 10 other men went to Mizpah. They killed Gedaliah and his officials, including those from Judah and those from Babylonia. After that, the army officers and all the people in Mizpah, whether important or not, were afraid of what the Babylonians might do. So they left Judah and went to Egypt. Jehoiachin is set free. This is also told in Jeremiah 52:31-34. Jehoiachin was a prisoner in Babylon for 37 years. Then evil Merodach became king of Babylonia, and in the first year of his rule, on the 27th day of the 12th month, he let Jehoiachin out of prison. Evil Merodach was kind to Jehoiachin and honored him more than any of the other kings held prisoner there. Jehoiachin was even allowed to wear his own clothes, and he ate at the king's table every day. As long as Jehoiachin lived, he was paid a daily allowance to buy whatever he needed.